Renee Bauer is an award-winning divorce attorney, motivational speaker, and founder of the Connecticut family law firm Happy Even After Family Law. She's certified as a mediator, a guardian ad litem, and a collaborative attorney. Renee is also the host of the top 2% podcast, She Who Wins, and she hosts live events by the same name. Her book, She Who Wins, won the American Book Fest Award in Women's Issues. As an accomplished litigator, Renee now spends her time helping women find their voice, take bold action, and claim their right to happiness. Renee, welcome.
Hi, Tracy. So nice to be here.
I am so happy to have you here today because I know that we're going to have a sassy little discussion. And you know me, I love talking about divorce and money. That's my jam. And of course, being real, divorce is super expensive. So it's pretty common when I'm talking with attorneys that they recommend that you find a settlement to your divorce rather than going to trial because trials are expensive. But today, you and I are talking about the ultimate showdown, settle or go to trial, because I know that you say, Renee, that it can actually cost you more to settle. Tell us more.
I know, right? Which I am not the lawyer who is known for pushing things to trial, to making things worse. Like, I'm the opposite of that. Like, I believe that if you can settle, that's what you do. But, and there's always a but there, sometimes I think that in this profession, I think that lawyers sometimes are so used to trying to get everything resolved that sometimes they do their client a disservice by settling, by having them compromise on things that they should not compromise on. So if we're talking about trading off 1 or 2 or 3 hours of parenting time and the fight is over, something it's so nominal like that, then you meet in the middle and you compromise. But if we're talking about walking away from something that you otherwise might have a right to, then sometimes going to trial is actually in your best interest. And I think to have a really effective lawyer and one that is doing you a service is telling you all of the potential possibilities if you go to trial. Here's the thing that you're entitled to. If you go to trial, you could risk this, but here's what the potential outcome could be. Because I think that client needs that information to understand that maybe they're giving up something that they shouldn't. And I think that lawyers, when you're doing it a long time, you see it over and over again, that they're so used to practicing together and having case after case. And some of them are friends. And so they're just pushing their clients into something that if you take a high level overview of it, you look at it and you say, why are we doing this? Why it just to get it done, just to play nice? Sometimes you just say, and it doesn't have to be adversarial. Sometimes you could just have two people who cannot reach a decision and you say, let's just let the judge decide. And that's the end of the story. And you have to do that. And I think a lot of lawyers are afraid to do that or are so used to trying to get your clients to agree to something or just don't want to litigate.
One of the things that I see as an expert in cases and being involved in the divorce community online and being in online divorce support groups and seeing what women are discussing, what I am seeing a lot is when their attorneys are telling them to give up their rights to spousal support. And I have real heartburn when you are legally entitled to that. I have real heartburn with just saying, oh, we're going to walk away from it. Now, some states are not spousal support friendly. Texas, for example, is terrible if you're trying to get spousal support. There are other states, though, where, hey, if you've been a stay-at-home mom for 15 years, you're damn right you're entitled to some kind of spousal support. And walking away from that stuff is, I think, exactly what you're talking about in terms of this being expensive.
Right. And it's also about setting proper expectations. I just had a phone call with someone who they'd been married a few years, and somewhere along the way, whether they Googled it or friends, family's uncle told them that you're going to get spousal support for your whole life. And they've been married, I think, maybe 4 years. It's not happening. And that woman didn't end up hiring me because I was not going to tell her what she wanted to hear, but she would go to someone who would tell her what she wanted to hear. And I guarantee you she'll find someone who will tell her, like, we'll fight for it. Now, she's going to spend a lot more money litigating because she has expectations that are unreasonable. But in a circumstance like you're talking about, especially stay-at-home mothers or parents, because we see stay-at-home dads too, and we see the same thing that's come up. That is a topic that often, I think courts, the trend is to reduce child alimony, cut down the length of time. And I think that there's really this trend, especially in my state, to not award alimony as long as it used to be when I first started practicing. But that's what you're hearing behind the scenes of the judges trying to put numbers on things and trying to get the case to work to a resolution. But when you go in front of a judge and you have put on the evidence and you start to share the story behind the marriage, what you gave up, what you were doing while you were raising the kids, it changes things. And I think that it paints this picture, and it's not just numbers anymore. There's a story. And in those situations, sometimes you roll the dice because you say, what do I have to lose? If zero is on the table, I go to trial, maybe I can get more than zero, and most likely you can.
Right. Well, we tend to hear that mediation or collaborative divorce saves money. Do you think that's always or most of the time true?
Yeah, so you know my answer to this question. I
Yes.
I actually love mediation. I think mediation for the right people is a really great way to move through your divorce in a non-adversarial way. But you have to be the right candidate for it, and the right candidates, right couple for it. Collaborative is something else entirely different. I think the heart behind what collaborative is, the intent is right. And for those who don't know, the collaborative process is you're committing to not going to court. Sounds great, right? But you're also committing to hiring divorce attorneys and having a neutral person who might be a mental health professional or a financial neutral. And the kicker here is there's so much time spent talking about setting agendas, having meetings to talk about the meetings, to set the agendas, to have there's so much time wasted. And I'm like the person, let's just roll up our sleeves, get to work and get this done. And I found in the collaborative process, you may not get until you might have their third meeting before you start to get into the meat of what there is. And I actually think collaborative is extremely expensive. Sometimes it's more expensive than litigation, where you just have two lawyers kind of walking the traditional road of trying to get the case resolved. Because I think there's a lot of wasted time. I think that there's a lot of gaps of time in between things happening. And believe it or not, sometimes the court's a little bit quicker to assign dates and move things along. So I am not a huge fan of collaborative. And I think it works for some people, but people have to know going into it is not the cost-effective option. It could get you your divorce resolved without litigation, but you could be spending more money.
So the collaborative process in divorce is a formalized process. So collaborative is kind of a term of art in divorce law, and I don't think that consumers necessarily realize that. And you can do your own form of collaboration or
Yeah.
friendly divorce without going through
Yes.
that process, which, by the way, I hear collaborative attorneys say it's not expensive to do it. And my experience has been exactly the opposite, that it has been quite expensive to do collaborative.
Yeah. And you know what else I found? Not all collaborative lawyers, and they will hang their hat and they'll be like, I'm collaboratively trained. I only take collaborative cases. They're not actually collaborative. There have been more times I've sat across from a lawyer who claims to be collaborative, who is actually quite adversarial. So now you have an adversarial attorney in a process that prevents you from using the court to actually resolve things. So clients feel pressured or bullied because they've invested so much money into this and they don't want to flush it down the toilet, because also in the collaborative process, if it doesn't work and it falls apart, you have to get all new lawyers. Those lawyers cannot represent you in court. So it ends up even being more expensive because now you've paid for two attorneys and not had a result from that first half of the process.
Okay, but trial is expensive. I hear clients saying they're being asked to put down tens of thousands of dollars before a trial. I mean, what's a client to do if, trial might be an option for them to get a better award from the judge than what's being recommended in settlement, but it's super expensive.
So I think what most people don't realize is you don't have to go to trial over everything. You can pick apart the things that you don't have an agreement on, because most people can agree on something. They can have an agreement on maybe just the parenting, and it's just the money that needs the trial. And so it's not but I think that the perception is, if we're going to trial, we're going to trial over everything. Nothing is on the table. And I have had trials where we're handing in an agreement that might be 10 pages long. They hear all of the things that we've already resolved that we don't need the judge to even look at. And so now we're just picking apart the few things that are, it's still considered trial, but it might have taken us 2 hours. So it's not a $10,000 retainer. It's, listen, we're going into court, we're having a hearing, which is a less scary word, just to resolve maybe the retirement issue or what to do with the house because we can't agree. Or maybe there's debt or IRS debt that we can't resolve and we just need to put a hearing on that and provide a little bit of evidence. So it doesn't have to be all or none. And I think clients think that if they can't agree on everything, they agree on nothing. Sometimes it's like that, but not all the time.
The explanation you just gave is why it is so important for people to be educated about the divorce process and to work closely with their attorney to understand what their options are. I don't think people understand that a trial doesn't have to be the big showdown. It can be one small piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think that I hate to disparage the legal industry. I think there's so many good lawyers who give a really great advice and counsel to their clients. And I think that there's so many lawyers who don't. I think that you have, I mean, it's not uncommon. I'm not saying anything unknown when I say that most people complain about their lawyers not being responsive. They don't know what's going on in their case. They call their lawyer and they don't hear from them for weeks. Like, that's a common complaint. That's how I end up with a lot of clients, is because someone doesn't want that anymore from their lawyer. So it's making sure like you're advocating for yourself as to what you need from your lawyer. Say, I need an explanation. I need your time. I need you to sit down and explain the numbers to me, and not just a passing email or a quick 30-second phone call because you don't have time for it. You are a client and you deserve to have that time. And if you're not getting it, if you don't feel heard, if you're not able to get in contact with them, or they brush you off, or they ignore your emails, then maybe it's time to look for someone else who will give you the kind of advocacy that you deserve so you can make educated decisions, just like you were talking about.
So we know that most divorce cases will settle instead of going to trial. And in some ways, I think that that's a really good thing. But if someone is working with an attorney who is pushing them towards settlement and pushing them towards settlement, someone who's very trial averse, the attorney just doesn't want to go to trial. How does a client make a decision like that? Because we're told, or clients are told, take your attorney's advice. You're hiring them for a reason.
Yeah. You know what? The best thing to do is go to another lawyer, pay for a consultation. Just don't do a free one. Like, pay for that lawyer's time to review your case, and sit there with an hour and pay for their time to look over all of the documents, look over all the financial records, and then sit down with you and give you some advice as to whether what you're about to sign makes sense. Because a lot of lawyers will look at it and say, you know what, you got really good advice. Like, I think this is probably as good a range of what you're going to get. I would recommend that you sign it. Most lawyers do not want to step foot in a case in like the messy end of the case when there's trial a couple weeks out. Lawyers aren't going to do that. Most of them don't want to, because it's a lot of work leading up to it. So you'll get honest advice from them, and say, but at least have that sit down to know that if you're signing something, you feel really good about the advice that you're getting is good advice, because they may tell you that, no, this is a horrible agreement. Then you can go back to your attorney and push them to say, no, I'm not going to agree. Now what? Like, now what do we do? And push them to have that hearing or be more aggressive. Or you get to make the decision that maybe you do want to bring someone in at the 11th hour to step in and take over the case. And there are lawyers that will do that. You'll probably pay a little bit more for them because they have to get caught up to speed, but they may save you a whole lot of money on the back end.
Let's talk about maybe a few examples of when going to trial would save you money. Like, maybe some of the issues that you think are important to look at. Maybe we do want to have a trial over those issues.
Yeah, the pension is a huge one. For me, like, people think that, so when you get a pension statement, often you're not actually seeing the true value of the pension. You're looking at maybe what the monthly benefit is, or whatever the pension provider is giving you actually doesn't show you what that full value is. The pension is often the most valuable asset, and people will think they'll trade it off, and someone might say, well, I'll keep the house with all the equity and not touch my husband's pension. And I'm like waving the flag. I'm like, don't do that. Like, what are you going to have for retirement? We're not talking apples to apples here. But sometimes you'll have a client or the other side that says the pension is mine. Like it's my asset. It's attached to my work. You keep your 401k that has $50,000 in it and don't touch my pension, because on its face, on that statement, it says it's only worth 50,000 too. And that, and they're not going to give that up. Like, that's going to be something that I'm going to tell the client, you need to go in front of this judge. You cannot trade that asset off, because it's a huge one. That's a really common one.
It's probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars if we're being realistic, right?
If not more.
And what I see in so many cases is, especially for the wife, wanting to keep the family home and therefore saying, well, if he'll let me keep the home if I say that I'll keep my hands off his pension. And like you said, it's not apples to apples.
No. And the house is one of those things. I'm sure you see it all the time too. I always ask why. Like, why do you want to keep it? Why do you want to be strapped for cash and house poor when you can't afford it? Why do you want to hold on to this maybe 3,000 square foot colonial that now you have to snowplow and deal with the landscaping and open the pool for what? Just because it's emotional attachment. Like, that's a really, really big one. It's like examining the why behind you want to keep something when it doesn't make financial sense for you to hold on to it. You're better selling it and taking that equity and then buying something that's more manageable for you, because you see so many people who say, I want the house, I want the house, I want the house. A year later, they come back and they're like, I don't want the house. I need to sell this thing because I can't afford it, which is a really, it's a sad place to be. And it prevents you from moving forward because you have so much attachment to this thing that you were married in.
What about going to trial on support issues, either spousal support or child support? Are those good ones to think about trial for?
Yeah, so in my state, child support is easy. We have guidelines that tell us what child support should be. There's always some reasons to deviate from that, but for the most part, we can work child support out. Some states have alimony guidelines. My state does not. So alimony is often the issue that people do go to trial for, because we cannot get to a meeting of the minds, because the person who has to pay it doesn't want to let go, and the person who's accepting it often feels like it's not enough. And so it becomes really hard to negotiate that. So support is one of those things that the judges often look at. And to answer your question, does it make sense to go? It depends on the circumstances. If you have two people who are educated, who are working full time, who have income that are close to each other, no, you're probably not going to want to spend the money for trial over support, even if one person earns a little bit more. If you have a stay-at-home mom, yeah, that's going to be a reason to go. If you have someone who's earning way less than that other person, yes, that's also going to be a reason to go. So that's why it's so important to have those conversations with your attorney and assess your particular situation, because you hear it all the time. I Googled it, or I talked to my friends, sister-in-law who got this, and we don't know what the facts of their circumstances are, and everyone's is so different. Nothing is black and white. Really, divorce law just lives in this gray area.
Well, you just brought up basically my final question, which was, if I'm, in the midst of my divorce and I'm trying to make this decision, do I settle? Do I go to trial? Like, what kind of discussions can I have with my attorney to help me make this decision? Because it's such a big decision.
Yeah. So it's, what's the range? What's the range that you can expect in trial? And can you live with the lowest part of that range, and obviously the highest? Can you live with that too? Because if you're the one paying, you may end up with having to pay that highest range. And looking at those numbers and saying, can you live with the outcome no matter what? Because once you go to trial, you lose complete control over what happens. If you have someone who's completely unreasonable and really toxic and doesn't want to resolve anything at all and is very explosive with their emotion and anger, I often say you're better off letting a judge look at that person and tell them, him or her, that here's the way it's going to be, because there's no rationalizing with someone like that. There's, personalities play such a role. If you have two people who really can't get to an agreement, but they're both reasonable, they're both trying to preserve the family in some extent, you might want to keep talking that one through and give and take a little bit and keep working on it. But if you have this personality that we often hear the word narcissist, those traits of someone like that, it's really hard to reach an agreement with someone who falls into that category of what we might consider is a narcissistic traits.
This was such good information, so much packed into such a short amount of time. Now, I know that you have a free quiz for someone to find out if her inner good girl is derailing her from achieving her goals, right?
Yeah, it's a fun quiz that's actually almost a companion to the book that I wrote called She Who Wins, about ditching your inner good girl. I think so many women fall into this category of being people pleasers and not having boundaries, which we often see in divorce settlements. So this quiz is identifying if you are one of those good girls and what you can do to ditch that part of yourself so you can have a life that you love.
Well, I will put the link to the quiz in the show notes, and I'm also going to put a link to your book in the show notes, the book called She Who Wins, Ditch Your Inner Good Girl, Overcome Uncertainty, and Win at Your Life. And which woman is going to want to read this book? What's going to draw her into this?
You know what, the best feedback that I get from readers is every person who reaches out to me to say that they read it is so different, and they're in different phases of their life. Some are entrepreneurs, some are CEOs, some are stay-at-home moms, and they all said, I feel like you wrote it just for me. And that was the point. It's for every woman. It's the topics in it for every single woman in any phase of your life, at any age, whether you're married, single, divorced, going through is something at a crossroads, quitting your job, getting promoted. It's for really anyone. And it's all of the issues that we as women have to deal with as we come into our own and find kind of like the sass and fierceness that we all can be.
I love that so much. Renee, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me.